And before we leave you tonight, comedian and Tonight Show host Jimmy Fallon delivering a surprise commencement address on Sunday to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School graduating class. His words to those graduates are our quote of the night.
When something feels hard, remember that it gets better. Choose to move forward and don't let anything stop you. Sometimes things that seem like setbacks can take our lives in a totally new direction that can change us in ways we don't expect. Put one foot in front of the other and keep going, day by day, moment by moment. If I could give you one last piece of advice, it would be this. Don't ever get off your parents' wireless plan. Ride that train as long as possible. You have no idea how expensive data is.
Good for them, and good for him for doing that. He had a strong message, and he made them laugh, too, which I'm sure they needed. So, good job. So, we'll be back here tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, actually, from Washington, D.C. Tucker Carlson is coming up next. See you tomorrow.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. On Friday, we told you an amazing story and an upsetting one about how the Obama administration made a series of terrifying changes to the way the FAA hires air traffic controllers. Ideologues in the Obama administration sought out the least impressive, least qualified applicants possible for one of this country's most vital jobs. Extra points were being given for being unemployed and failing in school. It was lunacy and a direct threat to public safety. It happened in secret, and remarkably, we've discovered it is still going on. You need to know about this. We have new exclusive information for you in just a minute. But first, a remarkable interview with former President Bill Clinton. For decades, as you watched, both Clintons had license to do essentially whatever they wanted to do, and they did. Fellow Democrats wouldn't criticize them, and neither would their obedient toadies in the media. The Clintons ran the Democratic Party, so they were too important to be held accountable. That has changed. Bill Clinton is now politically irrelevant, so there's no longer any reason to protect him. The media smell blood. Here, for example, is what happened when Bill Clinton visited the Today Show this morning to sell a new book. The conversation went directly to Monica Lewinsky. Watch.
But you didn't apologize to her.
I have not talked to her.
Do you feel like you owe her an apology?
No, I do. I do not. I've never talked to her, but I did say publicly on more than one occasion that I was sorry.
Ouch. He almost lost it, then sort of recovered. Then he went on to explain that even though Monica Lewinsky's life was completely destroyed by that experience, while he himself went on to become the single richest former president in history, he somehow is the real victim here. Watch this.
Do you think differently or feel more responsibility?
No, I felt terrible then. And nobody believes that I got out of that for free. I left the White House $16 million in debt. I've had nothing but women leaders in my office since I left. You are giving one side and omitting facts.
Mr. President, I'm not trying to present a side.
You think President Kennedy should have resigned? Do you believe President Johnson should have resigned? Someone should ask you these questions because of the way you formulate the questions.
Ouch. It went on like that. It was pathetic. That's pretty much it for Bill Clinton's life as a public figure. It is over. But what do the rest of us learn from watching all of this? Well, if you're a progressive leader, the lesson probably is not don't abuse women or even treat the people around you as you would like to be treated. Relatively few elected Democrats could live up to those standards. No, the question is this. Don't lose power. As long as you are useful to the left, nothing you do will be held against you. You could literally, I don't know, drive off a bridge and kill a woman in a drunk driving accident and still remain the most admired Democratic senator. But grow old and irrelevant? Next thing you know, they'll be asking you nasty questions about your impeachment. Best-selling author Mark Steyn has never been impeached, and at this point it seems frankly unlikely that he will be, but he joins us anyway tonight. Mark, it's great to see you.
Hey, good to see you too, Tucker.
So all of a sudden, Bill Clinton, for many years, protected by the press, is up for grabs. What is this?
Well, I think there's a sense, as you said, that he is now disposable. But also at a certain level, I do think there's a great shame at what the rationale for Clintonism in the 90s loosed. in the following 20 years. The most interesting moment to me, most horrifying moment actually, and the most pathetic and self-serving moment in this Today Show interview comes when he pleads in mitigation. And it's interesting to look at his facial expression as he says this, that I had a sexual harassment policy as governor in the 1980s. In other words, that's the lesson the Democrats took from this, that as long as you struck the right attitudes in public, you could do what you... I mean, try this in any other aspect of your life. Hey, bud, you're double parked. Oh, it's okay, officer. I voted for the municipal parking lot expansion bill in 1973. That's basically the argument that Clinton is making here. Because he passed a sexual harassment bill in the 1980s, because he signed one as governor, he's allowed to actually assault women or enter into degrading relationships, supposedly consensual relationships that ruined, in the case of Monica Lewinsky, a young woman's life. And actually, that's the rationale that Harvey Weinstein and Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General, and all these others, and John Conyers, the big Democrat big shot who was hosting trouserless meetings in his congressional office, they're all actually following that Clinton rationale, that because I have the right attitudes in public, I can do what I like in private.
Now, Harvey Weinstein tried, remember, his first defense was, well, I love abortion, so back off, leave me alone.
Right.
I wonder, though, so Clinton, I confess I feel a little sorry for Bill Clinton, because in my view, this is really about the Democratic Party changing and rejecting its past. But I also wonder, as long as we're going to have a reckoning with Clinton over his behavior, when do we get the reckoning with all of his defenders in the media? The Washington Post reporter who said that she would get on her knees for him for keeping abortion legal, the feminist leaders who attacked Monica Lewinsky in effect and dismissed the rape allegations. When do they get their time under the spotlight for what they did?
Yeah, and I think there's also other ones, too. There were ones who didn't attack Monica. But I remember, for example, being attacked in Canada by a feminist columnist who said, you're wrong about Monica. Monica isn't a victim here. She's going to make millions of dollars. She has had a miserable 20 years. Nothing she's done. She was essentially ruined and tossed aside by Bill Clinton. And as we saw in this interview, he thinks that he is the victim here. And he's out, by the way. He's on a book tour peddling this novel he supposedly, quotes, co-written, unquote, with James Patterson, and is supposedly, his most ambitious work of fiction since his deposition in the Paula Jones case. This Clinton is getting $1 bazillion to put his name to this ludicrous novel, and Monica Lewinsky is someone who has never had a fulfilled career, never had a fulfilled family life, and that doesn't matter because the Clintons just discard people and move on to the next bit of human debris.
Yeah, and the media goes along with it, of course. Mark Stein, thank you for that. It was great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Joining us now, Richard Goodstein, who served as an advisor to President Clinton, and he joins us in the studio. So before I ask you about the sexual harassment stuff, I want to play a clip from the former president on CBS this morning, also on this book tour, comma, which I hope goes on forever, comma, in which he addresses the great press coverage that Barack Obama got. And here's how he explained that. Watch.
They did treat him differently than other Democrats and Republicans. They liked him. And they liked having the first African-American president, and he was a good president.
Oh, so Obama got special treatment because he was black. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think he's talking about two different things there. One, it's stuck in his craw that Obama got better treatment than his wife did when they two ran against each other in 2008. And I think it's the case, and it's not unique to the press, that Americans, not just Democrats, not just people who voted for Barack Obama, felt actually a sense of satisfaction that the country had accomplished something by electing an African-American president.
That's all true.
So that's actually not something to deride, it's something to celebrate and not make fun of.
No, and I'm not making fun of it. I'm noticing a trend here with the former president, Bill Clinton, who said this a number of times, that Barack Obama was an affirmative action case and benefiting from lower standards from white liberals.
Yeah, he never said that.
Well, he said that repeatedly.
No, he did
said
not.
that on the campaign trail in 2008.
Absolutely
Yes, he did.
not. No,
yes, he did.
No, take
That's
South
what he's
Carolina.
saying there.
No, he didn't say anything about affirmative action.
Yes, he's
Look,
saying that
Donald Trump went to Fordham. Bill Clinton went to Yale Law School. Barack Obama went to Harvard Law School. You know, I love this notion of
I'm
somehow...
just trying to assess what the former president said. I'm not weighing in on this. I'm merely saying that here's this liberal icon saying, oh, he was a black guy. He got special treatment. I'm just wondering if you agree with that. That's all I'm asking.
No, I don't think he got special...
That's what Bill Clinton said. I'm just telling you.
No, what he said was that the press, and it was true for others, took a certain sense of pride in the United States having elected an African-American given the history of slavery. And he said he's a good president. and as you saw in the interview, he also thought that Donald Trump's sort of escapades, if you want to match kind of accusers versus accusers, that won't be a fair fight.
I'm just saying, look, he derides President Obama, but that's totally cool because he's a liberal. But let me ask you this. What do we know about sexual harassment that we didn't know 20 years ago when we were defending Bill Clinton up and down? Now we're deriding him. But what's changed? What have we learned? Do we know sexual harassment's wrong now? We didn't know that in 1998?
Yeah. So I will speak as somebody who was on the air talking about Bill Clinton back in 1998.
Right.
And my position from day one is I assume that Monica Lewinsky wasn't kind of somebody who was unable to think straight and that what the story was true. And yet, under the Constitution, this wasn't treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanor, which incidentally, the first word treason might apply to our current president.
By the way, the Congress agreed with you.
Yes,
he was
as did the American public.
You're exactly right. He was not convicted.
Right.
But there's a much deeper question about what constitutes mistreatment of another human being.
Right.
And at the time, all of us knew, because we were hearing it from them, the White House was deriding her as a stalker. And in that case, yes, they were. They told me. Sidney Blumenthal called me and told me that.
Sidney Blumenthal was kind of off on his own.
He worked at the White House.
I understand, but I'm just saying.
So they were saying, they were dismissing her and the other accusers as trailer park trash. And that was cool, but now it's not. So what have we learned? That not all accusers are trailer park trash when they're accusing Democratic politicians? Like, what didn't we know then that we know now?
So I think what Sidney Blumenthal did was kind of despicable. I think most people, myself included, said what I said, which is under the Constitution, whatever he did, he shouldn't lose his job for it.
No, but
we're
not talking about impeachment, because I mean, I agree with that. I don't think that impeachment was the right remedy for that. So I'm not arguing in favor of impeachment. That debate's over.
Right.
What I'm arguing about are the current standards for sexual harassment. What constitutes behavior that's acceptable and what's unacceptable? And liberals have changed their view. Conservatives haven't. They've been pretty consistent on this. They may excuse it.
They defended Donald Trump.
Absolutely, they defended Trump.
Yeah.
But I would never defend the behavior. They defended the behavior. And they stood by Clinton as he attacked this intern. And now they're like, oh, I can't believe it. It's so wrong. What do they know now that they didn't know then?
The Trump standard is who stayed with him after Access Hollywood and after he talked about grabbing women by their private parts. That's the Trump loyalist. That's who's held on a pedestal in the Trump orbit, right?
Okay,
so they are defending
him. My question, which is, did you not know that it was wrong to attack interns after you had sex with them and then denied it in the White House?
So I think what Mark Stein just said was supposedly consensual. There's no dispute that it was consensual. Whether there was an imbalance of power and it was wrong for Bill Clinton to do, he actually apologized.
But and why doesn't he call her and apologize? I wonder.
You know, it's an interesting thing. You'd have to ask him. Have other reporters ask him. What do you
think?
He has said over and over.
He's an awful person. Let's be honest.
Page 810 of his book, and over he has said he apologizes. Donald Trump hasn't apologized to a single person. He calls them liars.
Okay, so you're against Trump. I get it.
No, but I'm just saying there's a big difference.
It's a sincere question. Like, why wouldn't he? Was asked 4 times by that NBC report. Right. 4 times, and he lied about it at first. Oh yeah, I've apologized, and then the reporter pressed and said no, in person. He finally conceded, no, I haven't talked to her. Why does he just call her?
You know, I don't think there's any news there.
No, but why doesn't he?
Again, you'd have to ask him what his thinking is. Does it shake your faith in
him as a man?
I think trust me, he will call Monica Lewinsky the day after Donald Trump calls all 17 of his accusers. Okay, and what year do you think that's going to happen? Sorry.
That's his standard.
Yeah, how's that? We've kind of gotten a long way by 2018, haven't we?
It's actually unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right, good. As long as I don't have to take any more lectures from the left ever again, I'll be all set.
None from me, I promise.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
We have new exclusive information on terrifying new air traffic control standards at the FAA, which they are defending. Those standards could put you and millions of Americans at risk. No joke. We've got the details. Plus, one of the architects of San Francisco's sanctuary city law has decided actually it's insane. We're talking to her next. San Francisco may be the most welcoming city in America if you happen to be an illegal immigrant with a record of violent felonies. And if you are, get there right away. We're not exaggerating, incidentally. How crazy is San Francisco's sanctuary policy? Well, so extreme that one of its original supporters, one of its architects, Angela Alioto, wants to change that policy, having seen it in action. Tomorrow, voters have the chance to nominate her for mayor. It'll be an interesting test, not just for Alioto, but for San Francisco and the state of California and this country, frankly. Angela Alioto joins us tonight. Angela, thanks a lot for coming on. I should stipulate for our viewers, you're a liberal Democrat. I don't think we agree on really anything, which I think gives you credibility on this subject. So you're against the sanctuary policy as it is now working. Why?
I'm against it because when I wrote it in the early 90s, we did not include violent felonies. And they amended it in 2013 and 2016 to include covering violent felonies. As a matter of fact, there's like a three-pronged test that a violent felon would have to go through in order for them to call the ICE. And so I said to the supervisor who did it, Supervisor Campos, I said, I'm not going to agree to that, because they did come to me as the original author and asked me, do I agree with adding violent felons? I said, of course I don't agree with adding violent felons. That's ridiculous. The concept is to protect families. The concept was never to protect violent felons. So when I did this ordinance a month ago, there was quite a bit of hysteria. All of the supervisors and the mayor of the city and the city attorney and the DA got on the iconic steps of San Francisco City Hall and called me all sorts of names and said this was outrageous, that I would be attacking the sanctuary law. I am not attacking the sanctuary law. I am attacking violent felons. They should not be protected under the sanctuary law or any other law in San Francisco. Because as you said, we become let's go to San Francisco, we'll be safe. And the other night on the news, it was very interesting, Tucker. The other night on the news, one of the news people mentioned that there hadn't been anybody in the county jails had been brought there in over a year and a half. And that's because the standard's too high.
Well, that's not. I mean, so just tell us, for those of us who don't live in San Francisco, what's the thinking behind wanting more violent felons who are illegal aliens in your city? How does that improve the life of the city of San Francisco?
Tucker, I have asked every single elected official who came out against me in the middle of this mayor's race, by the way, which was pretty dramatic. I've asked them, why do you want to protect violent felons? And the answer to that, if they answer at all, most of them don't answer, but the answer that some of them gave me was that I'm chipping away at the sanctuary law. I said, I'm not chipping away at the sanctuary law. I wrote the law originally. It was to protect families. I would know that I was chipping away at the law. And I have to tell you something, though. I'm running for mayor, as you know, and I meet hundreds of people every day. Yeah. And one of the first things the citizens of San Francisco say to me is, thank God you're doing something about dangerous felons. It's the first thing they say.
I don't think I'm in danger of swaying a single vote in the Democratic primaries in San Francisco when I say, A, God bless you for doing this, and B, I really hope you prevail. I mean, I think this is a test for your city. I really do. It's the most beautiful city in America.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. We got title and summary from the city attorney. Now, interesting thing about getting title and summary from the city attorney is that he was standing on the steps condemning me. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest.
It's unbelievable. If you get this, I hope you'll come back on to celebrate. At least this part of your agenda. I agree. Angela Alioto, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, free speech is obviously our birthright as Americans, but it was born in the UK. And free speech seems to be dying there as well. Mass immigration and the cult of multiculturalism that made it possible, in the end, proved more powerful than that country's centuries-old heritage of unrestricted public expression. The latest casualty is journalist and activist Tommy Robinson. He's sitting in prison tonight. His crime, daring to talk about sexual abuse rings run by Muslim immigrants to the UK. Robinson pointed out that Britain's policies are destroying the country, so the people who made those policies jailed him. We talked to Katie Hopkins from Rebel Media about this the other night. Here's part of the conversation.
What we have to ask ourselves is, what happened happened to freedom of speech in the UK, because I firmly believe, and it's my opinion, we no longer have freedom of speech in the UK, and I believe Tommy Robinson will be killed inside the prison, and it will be the establishment that have blood on their hands.
Douglas Murray is the author of the fantastic book, The Strange Death of Europe. He has followed Robinson's case from the beginning. He joins us tonight. Mr. Murray, thank you for coming on. I'm not surprised that this is happening, because the people in power always try and tamp down on dissent. That's always been the case. I'm surprised by the reaction to it. How much press has this gotten in the UK? How much outrage has it evoked? What's the response?
Well, it's been remarkable. There was actually a reporting restriction on the fact that Robinson had been arrested and sent to prison within hours. There was actually a reporting restriction on that in the UK that made it impossible for any British journalist like myself to write about it for some days, which meant that the international media picked it up, but here in Britain we weren't allowed to talk about it. There's an ongoing trial, a rape gang trial, which
Wait,
he was
may
actually...
I just stop you right there? So what would,
Sure.
I mean, groups of people in similar professions go on strike all the time. Why wouldn't journalists in UK say, we're covering this? Tough if you don't like it, come and arrest us. Why would they obey an order like that?
Well, we do have pretty strict contempt orders here in the UK, and basically anyone who would have reported it would have ended up risking going to prison themselves. So it's a very tricky one. There is one, by the way, very quick justification for this, which is that there is an ongoing trial which he was reporting outside of, and there's a problem about reporting on that trial. Again, I'm sitting in London, so I have to be rather careful about mentioning that trial.
It's unbelievable. So and I know his politics, which I don't even fully understand, and I don't even care what they are, but I sense they're very different from those of most reporters in Great Britain. But has there been support for him from journalists in the UK?
No, not really. I mean, this is something I write quite a bit about in my book, in The Strange Death of Europe, which is that basically we have in Britain, as across Europe, this primary and secondary problem issue, whereby you have a primary problem, as in this case, thousands and thousands of young British girls who've been raped by gangs of men we euphemistically describe as Asian, although they don't include any Chinese or Koreans. Right. We've had thousands of people who've been raped by these gangs. That's the primary problem. The secondary thing is that there are people who then say, look at what's happening. And actually, as I've said on this case, as with many others, the law and everything else comes down incredibly hard on the secondary thing, indeed sometimes harder than on the primary issue. I wrote about this, by the way, the other day at the Gayson Institute website. You can see the piece about, I said, let's just compare the treatment of Tommy Robinson, who's been, whether you agree with him or not, trying to draw attention to the rape gang stuff, and the one official from the county council in Oxfordshire who was in charge of child services when hundreds of girls in her area were raped and abused, and it turned out that the council knew about a whole load of it, and they just ignored the families. Now, now Tommy Robinson is now in jail. That woman at the county council in Oxfordshire got a £250,000 payoff several years later to leave the council, and now, wait for it, is running the tourist agency Visit Oxfordshire.
Your society really hates itself. When did that start?
Well, my view is, you see, that this is all an expression of an incredibly wide societal cowardice, and it starts off in a country like Britain with kind of good manners. You know, we sort of want everyone to get along. We want to be nice to each other. We want to be nice to people who are incomers and so on. And then you discover terrible things that are going on, minorities within minorities, but nevertheless you discover things that are going on. And then you get to this really weird position that we're in at the moment. It's the position I describe as the one that says in multiculturalism, well, we've got a bit more gang rape than we used to, but then there's a wider range of cuisines, so
it's unbelievable.
Who's to say?
I recognize that. I wish we had more time. Mr. Murray, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos is at the center of the Mueller investigation and the year-long media onslaught, but does the case against him tell us anything about Russian collusion? His wife joins us next. I want to bring you a Fox News alert. A former Navy sailor pardoned by the president says he is now suing former Obama administration officials, including the former President Barack Obama himself, as well as former FBI Director Jim Comey. Christian Saucier served a year in prison for taking pictures of classified areas on a sub that he worked on. He says the officials responsible for prosecuting him went easy on Hillary Clinton, who also mishandled classified information, but of course never served time or was charged for that. His lawyer says they plan to highlight the differences between Clinton's treatment and his. Well, after more than a year of wasted time on the fantasy of Russian collusion in the 2016 election, there's still no evidence that any of it actually happened. That doesn't mean that lives haven't been destroyed. Many have been, beginning with George Papadopoulos, who at the time was a 28-year-old unpaid advisor to the campaign. He later pled to a charge of making false statements to federal investigators looking into Russia. He has not yet been sentenced. Simona Magiante Papadopoulos is his wife, and she joins us tonight. Mrs. Papadopoulos, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for hosting me. Good evening.
So you married your husband after this investigation began, after he'd become famous for his purported collusion with Russia. You're confident he did not collude in any way with the Russian government?
I know he did not, and actually one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, and thank you for hosting me, is to set the record straight about George, in particular in response to James Comey statements on national TV recently, in which he says that George tried actively to obtain emails on Hillary Clinton. This statement is completely false. George never had any interaction with the Russians. He has never been to Russia either. He doesn't speak Russian, never talked to Russian officials, yet is apparently at the origin of the Russian investigation. This is quite paradoxical for me.
So my understanding is that all of this begins in March of 2016 when he's approached in London by a Maltese professor who has since disappeared with the offer of information from the Russians. What has happened to that professor? Do you know?
Well, I know personally this professor because I used to work with him. The fact that he completely disappeared is very suspicious, but what I know about this meeting between George and the professor is that he was talking casually about an information that was already in the public domain at the time they met, and it was about emails on Hillary Clinton. We have to understand he was talking about email on Hillary Clinton and not about the DNC emails.
Right.
So it's a completely different topic. It was a gossip conversation, very casual, that George voluntarily reported to the FBI at the time of their interview, and it became apparently the reason why people think he is at the origin of anything so-called collusion, but actually never colluded with the Russian. He didn't do anything in Russia. Even his job, his work was completely focused in the Middle East, in particular in Israel.
No, of course. He worked at the Hudson Institute here and was a big proponent of Israel. So this professor, who do you think he was working for? What was that about? And where do you think he's gone? What was his agenda?
I honestly have no idea. My personal opinion, which I shared in different interviews, is that he's a very shady character. He could be in Italy. Recently, I heard he doesn't want to appear publicly because of the situation he's involved into and directly through George. But my understanding is that he was gossiping about emails. And again, I remember this information was already highly speculated by all media all over the world at the time. So there was nothing secret about that. Yet, as I said, it's very fascinating and actually frustrating to see my husband at the center of this investigation for talking in a bar. Even the meeting with Downer, which apparently in London, which apparently originated the Russia investigation, is contested by the same Downer. He never confirmed that George explicitly talked about emails. So
it doesn't. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Where is your husband now? He's under a gag order, is my understanding, awaiting sentencing. Is that right?
Yes, he's awaiting sentencing. That's why I think it's very important to set the record straight right now, because there are a lot of misunderstanding about his situation, about his role. I used to say that his role is very important. I used to compare him to John Dean. I never meant to make this comparison in the sense that would lead to the president impeachment. Actually, I think it's a key role because he has been approached by many different characters that, let's say, spies. He has been the victim of many setups, not only Holper, other setups, and I'm sure he will be happy to share this information when the time is right.
Do you think that your husband's going to prison?
I honestly I know how much dedicated and committed was in the Trump campaign. I know he did an excellent job. I know he's because of this incident, his freedom is challenged. So I trust and hope and I ask to President Trump to pardon him. I hope he will.
Okay. Ms. Papadopoulos, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
A couple of years ago, while nobody was watching, the Obama administration changed the hiring standards for air traffic controllers. Suddenly, being unemployed and bad at science got you more points on the test than being a licensed pilot. The new system is dangerous and insane. Why won't anyone from the FAA come on this show to defend it? We've got new information on that next. Well, the FAA has for decades been one of the most trusted institutions in government, and for good reason. Commercial air travel has been the safest in the world, in part because of the FAA's high standards. But under the Obama administration, that began to change radically without anybody paying attention. The Obama administration pressured the FAA to meet abstract diversity goals. Now, nobody bothered to explain why diversity is a relevant criterion for air traffic controllers. No one will explain it now. We called the FAA today, and we got silence when we asked that question, which is the most basic question. But it didn't matter. Starting in 2014, the FAA added a biographical questionnaire to the application process. Applicants with a lower aptitude in science got preference over applicants who'd scored excellent in science. Applicants who'd been unemployed for the previous 3 years got more points than licensed pilots got. In other words, the FAA actively searched for unqualified air traffic controllers. That is insane, and they knew it was insane when they did it, but they did it anyway. Today, we obtained new information. It is an internal email written by an executive at the firm that devised the FAA's biographical questionnaire. In that email, the executive admits that the test he devised has nothing to do with finding the best air traffic controllers. If you want good air traffic controllers, find people with experience. That was his advice. The FAA ignored this and used the biographical screen anyway. They didn't care about finding the best air traffic controllers. Compared to diversity, your safety meant nothing to them. We reached out to Greg Martin. He's the FAA's top spokesman. We wanted to know why the FAA would ever use totally irrelevant criteria, such as what people look like, in order to hire for a job as vital as air traffic control. We couldn't get an answer. We also asked the acting FAA administrator, Daniel Ewell, to come on the show and explain what exactly is going on and why he was too cowardly to appear. So was the previous administrator, Michael Huerta. He's the one who originally signed off on the policy. He's also a coward. But we're going to keep pushing until we get an answer. In the meantime, we're joined by former air traffic controller Michael Pearson. He's also a lawyer and is suing the FAA over all of this. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Tucker.
So I want to be certain I didn't misstate that. The biographical screen, which was devised under the Obama administration for the reasons I just explained, was created by a company that admitted that it was not the right way to find the most talented air traffic controllers, but the FAA kept it in anyway. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. Actually, you didn't misstate it. You understated what occurred. To put this story in a nutshell, in late 2011, early 2012, members of the National Black Controllers Association had a meeting with the Rainbow Push Coalition, Jesse Jackson, and some high-level DOT and FAA officials. Michael Huerta was part of those meetings, by the way. And right after that meeting, the FAA put an immediate hold on hiring. They stopped hiring. They've used excuses like sequester, but that's not really what happened. Basically, they shut down the process, even though the nation needed air traffic controllers. Lots were retiring. The system was needing new trainees to go through the system because it takes a period of time to get through, but they did that consciously. Then the purge of the 2,600 or more qualified CTI students and graduate of programs across this country, including traditionally black colleges and disadvantaged colleges, were wiped off a list. And by the way, that list, the 2,600 folks, included a large percentage of female and minority applicants who would have been fantastic air traffic controllers.
And so these are people who were going to school for it, basically.
Going to school for it, had prior military experience in the area, were pilots. Some of these individuals were more qualified, certainly, than I was when I started. Then after that, they designed a test you're speaking about, a biographical assessment, biographical questionnaire. It's varied in terms, but this first one was called a biographical assessment that was made for a different purpose, as you stated. It wasn't supposed to be used the way it was, and actually the creator actually notified the FAA of that. They used it anyway. In effect, that test punished people with any aviation knowledge, any air traffic control experience, any aviation experience, any science experience. And then the FAA came out, and they actually had one individual, public relations out of the Southwest region, published that it was for diversity, and that was pulled back immediately. And then they stated it was for the best and brightest candidates.
This is so rotten and corrupt. I don't think anybody wants to live in a country where you can't trust air traffic control because they're so dogmatically ideological that they're intentionally seeking the worst candidates. It's insane. Very quickly, what about all the unions and all the pilots groups? Private commercial pilots groups. What about all the people in aviation world who knew this was going on? Why did nobody say anything about it?
Well, I think certain groups did try to say something, but quite frankly, there wasn't enough press coverage on it. And because of other political reasons, it didn't come to the forefront. The bigger question is, after those students were purged, then the FAA literally knew that there were individuals engaged in cheating to pass the new biographical assessment. So they wiped the students off the list. They allowed a group to then engage in intentional cheating, gave basically the subgroup, the National Black Coalition of Federal or Aviation Employees, the answers to that test. And that's as big of a story as anything else. What happened? And
unfortunately, we're out of time, but this will not be the last time we address this. This is a threat to the country. It's totally wrong, and it can only happen in secrecy, and we plan to pierce that. So thank you, Michael, for all your help with this, and I know that we'll talk to you again.
Thank you. It goes deep and broad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, of all the doctrines and dogmas of the left, the most pervasive is that the rules do not apply to the people who make the rules. And we have an amazing example of that up next. It's fun being a professional environmentalist. Pretty easy gig, not a lot of heavy lifting. The best part is you don't have to apply any of the rigorous standards you set to yourself. You can berate the little people for their SUVs while being chauffeured to the private airfield in your Suburban. Al Gore literally does that, no exaggeration. Gore also lives in the single biggest house you've ever seen, and yet he's still deeply upset about your carbon footprint. Well, the latest fear in the environmental community is that poor people in hot countries in the third world might start using air conditioning. Can you imagine? Next thing you know, they'll be demanding canapes at Davos and crowding the beaches on St. Bart's. The insanity! It must stop. Josh Fox is a noted environmental filmmaker, and he joins us tonight. Josh, can you imagine if people in Bangladesh had the gall to use air conditioning, how upsetting that might be to people in the Bay Area?
Well, I think you're misstating the premise of the study that you're quoting.
I don't think so.
But before we get into that, let me ask you a question. Why would air conditioners cause climate change? I mean, that's what you're saying. You're saying
I'm not actually saying that.
Air conditioners cause climate change.
Well, look, my mind is open.
Well, that's what your producer said to me when they invited me in on this segment, so I was assuming that that's what you were going to talk about.
Well, I'm capable of speaking for myself, and let me just say that I'm totally open to any possibility. Turns out UFOs are real. I never thought that before either. So I'm happy to believe in climate change. You just have to answer my questions slowly so I can understand.
Okay, what's the question again? The question is, why would people in the Bay Area be outraged by people in Bangladesh having air conditioners? Well,
it's just interesting.
Actually, people in the Bay Area are not at all outraged by that. No one is outraged by that. In fact, the study that you are quoting said that we should look for more efficient air conditioners. That's pretty much all it said. It said if we want to look at climate change emissions, we should look for more efficient air conditioners.
Yeah, do you have a more efficient air conditioner in your car?
I have the air conditioner that comes with the car, but
not a more efficient one.
Okay, let's just go back and backtrack for a second here, because this is what happens every single time. You misstate the premise, and then I have to go ahead and correct you. So what's really at issue here is climate change, right? The study is talking about climate change and how air conditioners could make climate change worse. But the premise of the study is also, in my view, incorrect, because if you use something that actually cools the planet for your electricity, like wind, like solar, instead of using fossil fuels, you can actually cool the planet at the same time as you can cool somebody's house.
It's hilarious.
So you don't have to use
wind and
fossil
solar
fuels.
Cool the planet. That's not true. But let me just ask you, let's get back to the facts here. Hold on. Let's get back to the science that you and I can agree on. So I want to ask
Okay, what can we
you
agree
said
on?
that you're concerned that poor people in hot countries might get air conditioning that's not the most efficient possible air conditioning. And I asked you a really simple question, which is, have you made those same steps in your own life? Have you changed the air conditioning in your vehicle to become the most efficient possible? And you said, no, I haven't, but you want the Bangladeshis to do it, which leads me to believe that maybe you're
I drive
hypocrite.
a used car and I drive a used hybrid. In fact, I just got totaled on the streets of New Orleans by a drunk driver, so I don't have a car right now. But the bottom line is this.
But you haven't actually done what you want the Bangladeshis to do, and you don't have any plan to.
Oh, absolutely, I have. Tucker, no, you're cutting me off right now, because I use a service where I can buy renewable energy instead of having to buy power
you
from
pay
fracking
indulgences.
or from coal.
Oh, I get it. So you get to have the things that the poor people in the third world can't have because you're rich enough to pay for indulgences.
No, Tucker, you're also again misstating the facts. It's cheaper to use solar energy than any other form of energy right now for electricity generation, except for wind. It's actually cheaper to use solar than it is to use gas.
No, but I'm talking about your personal behavior. You want to change the subject to some macro question. I want to ask how you're living, but you don't want to talk about that because you pay indulgences.
It's absolutely not about people's behavior. It is about the systems that are at work here. And this is a political question. This is not a question of consumer habits.
You get to lecture the poor people, but you don't have to change the way you live.
Well, I'm definitely not a rich guy. If you know what documentary filmmakers make, you should probably know that.
Well, relative to the people living without air conditioning in Bangladesh, you are.
What we're talking about is using fossil fuels for air conditioning. And what we should be talking about is how to use the most efficient air conditioning and the best power. The best power is renewable energy.
But you're not doing that yourself.
And that is, in fact, what the study says. Yes, I am.
But you're not doing that yourself, Josh. You're paying for offsets.
Yes, I just said that I was, Tucker. Tucker, you're not listening to me.
No, you said that your car
Tucker, the rules of physics apply to everyone, including you, which is presumably why you don't float up out of that chair, because gravity applies to you. Although, of course, you have so much hot air and bombast coming out of you that it's possible that you might just inflate and fly off the set. But what I'm trying to explain to you, when you burn fossil fuels,
you beat me in the cliche contest. We're out of time. I appreciate it, though. Thanks. We'll be right back.